I want to speak about how to get a happier user. That was the original topic of the talk. My point of view on that is that sometimes there are a few questions that are really helpful to ask yourself at the beginning of any digital project or when solving pretty much any problem. So this is going to be something very, I would almost say borderline philosophical, just simply and elegantly reasoning about what is a problem and how do we solve it. What are requirements and how do we actually get to a point where we elegantly can develop a solution. All right. So my original background is in industrial engineering and industrial design. So there we often use three different ways, and I'm going to draw something in that part that's just a little bit lighter. A number of different ways of looking at requirements when you want to solve a problem. All right. So one of the ways, there are three of them, so I'm going to try and do it like this. Oh, that came out super well. I have to say, because I was practicing this large and it's tricky to do. Okay, so one of them is to consider, I should probably write larger than this as well, is to consider scenarios. Okay, so let's just take the simple case of do it for these tripods here. Okay, so one of the scenarios where the thing that we want to design, the problem that we want to solve, is something like this, where you've got kind of a close range to where you want to have a camera. Sometimes the camera is pretty heavy, okay? And sometimes you've got something that's a little bit smaller. Sometimes you've got the kind of case where you want to stick it around, I don't know, some scaffolding or some railings, and you get these gorilla pod kind of solutions. So that's a totally different use case than what you might have in this case. Here you've also got some of the one thing is a lot smaller than the other one, so it's probably a weight difference there as well, and just the size of the thing, where the center of gravity is, blah, blah, blah. So you get many different scenarios, or maybe we could just rename this if we're going to talk a little bit more digital. Just call these use cases. Okay? So use cases for where our thing, you can call it an artifact if you want, just anything, will be used. Another way of thinking about how our thing will be used is functionally. And so that means we have got functional requirements as well. So for these tripods, the main issue here is to try and keep that camera off the ground. We want to keep it at a certain height, and we preferably don't want somebody to have to stand there to hold it the whole time. We probably also want to swivel it a little bit, and there are a number of different functions that we want to fulfill or perform with our thing. Okay. Then another way, there are probably more, but these are the ones I want to speak about, is just technically. So technical requirements. Okay. So this is where you get to something that is probably a little bit more engineering. So the kind of things that you can maybe quantify. So maybe we can say that we want to be able to support something up to 5 kilograms. Probably means maybe we should take care of some kind of tensile strength in the legs of the tripod. Maybe it can only be, once we've folded it up, it can only be so long, and it can only be so heavy as well. So you've got a number of different technical requirements for your solution as well. Okay. And these are different ways of looking at what do we need to build. Okay. And that's exactly the same thing we're doing every time with digital projects as well. There's really no difference in the thinking, but somehow it feels to me that sometimes things get convoluted. Everything gets so tricky, and how do we do this, and what should it do, and what should we consider? And I think sometimes it's really helpful just to take a step back and look at the solution with a bit more of a bird's eye point of view. So in a way that I think that is really handy is to consider some of these intersections here. Okay, so let's maybe just start with that one. Is to ask yourself, can I think about functional requirements in terms of my use cases? So let's move to the digital case. Let's now say that one use case that we've got is that somebody would want to maybe add a user to some kind of system. You need to register an account, but he might be on a mobile platform, might be traveling on a train, for instance. That's one use case, one scenario that we need to be prepared for. Functionally, we know add user. That is one thing that we know that we should do, which probably entails check if there is a user. If this person might have an account already, we maybe need to enter some account details. We maybe need to verify that the email address is correct. We need to store what information we've given. We need to store in the database, and. So there are a number of different functional elements. Some of them that I mentioned now might not be the best examples because they kind of speak to the more technical element as well. But functionally, the idea is we want to add another user. But when you think about it from our different use cases, that sort of vastly differs from when we've got access to the database itself and we can add a row to a table. And that would be another way of functionally doing what we're doing. But the use case is totally different because the other person might have no technical skill whatsoever. They might be in a hurry. They might be having a bad day, if you want to bring emotion into it as well. So it is really handy to take a look at the intersection between use cases and functional requirements. And this is where I think you can maybe ask yourself a first question, which says, what is the desired behavior of solution? Okay, just to make it a little bit quicker. So the main thing that we're worried about here is how should our solution, how should our thing, our artifact, how should it behave? So we want to try to, for each use case, construct a few strings of functions that describes the behavior of what our solution should do. And I think that's a very good point to start. And you will notice that totally ignores the technical point of view. So if you just maybe think about what we spoke about earlier on, about e-health platforms, for instance. If you just say, what would be the use cases and what is the functional requirements? Use case might be somebody that is sitting at home and they want some kind of information about some health issue. Right, so maybe they have got some kind of mobile device with them, or they might have a laptop computer or something like that. But functionally, they want to get information about what is the closest place where they can do A, B, and C. I don't know if that's a good example, but that's the kind of thing we're looking at. So there, it would make really a lot of sense to figure out what is the desired behavior. What do we want this thing to do? Because if the use case is rather some kind of digital signage that is used inside of a hospital, then the use case is totally different. Then we want to do something else. It might be that we still want to guide them to go where they need to, but the desired behavior of our solution is something quite different. Then, secondly, I think it could be handy to consider this intersection here, where you can ask yourself, is a suitable technology or mechanism, for that matter, available? Because that means after I've done this, I actually learn a whole lot about both my use cases and the functional requirements of my solution by just thinking about what is the desired behavior. That means that I now know a whole lot more about my use cases by the time that I arrive here, which means I'm in a much better position to see out of the whole stack of technologies that are available, are there some of them that might be more applicable than others? Because sometimes your use cases can really tell you a lot about which technologies will be good or not. If it's something that clearly needs to be something web-based, then obviously we're already in that domain. If it's something that for some reason you feel an open source technology is a good idea, now already you're more delimiting the number of technologies that you can use. Sometimes you know that we want to add content on one place and we want to display it on 5 different systems. That means that we might have to choose some kind of way that we can distribute content. Maybe just before, because I'm going to forget it in the end, what sometimes happens is when you're busy with this phase of picking technologies, you arrive at a client that tells you, we need some kind of API-based solution. How did you arrive at that answer? We had no idea. So maybe it's good to actually explicitly go and ask, given the use cases, how will this thing be used? What will be the most applicable technologies that we can implement? Then thirdly, use this color for this case. Here, this now relates technical requirements to functional requirements. That helps us to ask, that didn't work. Just going to write in something a little bit brighter and shorter. How to implement. Because that now means that the question on the table is, how do we use the technology that we selected to achieve the desired behavior, to achieve the functional requirements or what we want our solution to actually do, right? So you will see that this is nothing rocket scientisty. Scienty is not a word, as you would have noted duly, right? And maybe just so since I'm seeing you here now, I would say that sometimes we see that one of the desired behavior that we want is we want people to buy things, right? And then we might say, well, a suitable technology, imagery is quite handy. We need to pick those well as well. But sometimes words is a very good way to sell something, especially also when it's something maybe related to health issues as well, where you really care about the content. Then how do you implement that? That is super important, because now we need to make sure that if we chose words there, if we chose words here, then we need to make sure that we implement them in exactly the right way. And it's also relating to those databases from earlier on. If we've got a case where the desired behavior is that we want to pick up, I don't know, this might sound a little bit big brothery and not a good example either, but try to understand what is the social behavior, what is the patterns of people that are next of kin to people that are diagnosed with autism. Then perhaps if we want to understand that, then perhaps choosing a technology like Neo4j is not a bad idea, because that allows us to identify certain patterns in a big data set. Then the question is, how do we implement that, right? Then lastly, this is the part that's then actually super important. I do it like this, so it makes more sense. So this is where you actually need to be heading. That means that you simultaneously want to consider functional requirements, technical requirements, and also the use cases, because that's where everything actually comes together. That's the point where we're saying, how can I implement a specific technology to achieve specific functions, but in a certain use case? Because it's no good to just say, our system will let you upload pictures. Okay, that's fantastic. So maybe we're using something PHP-based to upload pictures. It would be those to PHP and uploading pictures. Where and how? Sort of why, who is this person, when are they doing it, what is the point behind all of it? And only when you understand all of that can you actually make an informed choice about which technologies work for you. And only then have you actually then at the end got the ability to, when you get to the quality assurance step, to actually say, now we can evaluate and judge. We can see, does our solution exhibit the desired behavior of what we should have done? That's probably the first thing that you should check. Not only just about how do we automate tests to make sure that the system does what it should do. In the use cases, do we deliver the functions that we actually want it to? Because in the end, that's probably the only thing the user is going to care about. Does it really do what I need it to do from a functional point of view? Then sure, we can definitely check, did we use an applicable technology? And did we implement it in a good way? So that might mean that we've got certain standards about performance or scalability, many more technical issues that we need to check. Are we using our technology in a good way? And then we can, at the end, about the whole project, ask, did we implement a suitable technology to achieve functions in the use cases? That means that we've got a holistic view on how to solve a problem. And to me, in my mind, that is the kind of thinking that you need to solve pretty much any problem, and I think all of us actually do it We might not explicitly think about it, but you go through these steps. I think there might be different sequences to it, but to me this sort of makes sense to try and firstly understand away from the technical side what needs to happen, then what's the best technology and how do we use it, and then try to consider all of those at the same time. But I think the important thing here is the fact that in both of these first questions, use cases form part of the intersection. And that's why I think it's applicable to the discussion that we've got tonight, because it's about UX. So it's about putting the user first, trying to understand, when we think about functional requirements, putting yourselves in their shoes and then considering functional requirements. Then also when you're picking a technology, that might be a little bit contentious because users don't really always care about the technology, but that means that you still need to put yourself in their shoes and think about it. Are there things that might be more beneficial to them than others? So using use cases as your point of departure, I think your chances of having a happier user in the end is probably a lot better. And that's my talk. Maybe I should just mention that we're working on a few ways that you can use this kind of thinking to link it to the way that we execute projects. Because you will see that reasoning like this doesn't have the word waterfall in it, and it doesn't have the word agile in it. It's totally jargon-less. It's just about solving a simple problem as people. Because from there, this gives you all the building blocks. You just need to do it right. Because then you can iterate this process. You can do this holistically for a whole project, or you can do this inside a sprint in an agile kind of project as well. Because that still means you need, for whatever you picked, you need to go through these steps. And you do it even though it might be implicit. You might never write it down. I can promise you the more explicitly you do it, you will gain from it. And that is my talk. Thank you. Questions? Kanskje?
What type
That's
of
maybe.
projects do you run?
At the moment, we are an open source web development agency, so we try to build online solutions that solve complex problems. So we're trying to using digital tools to solve problems. I don't think we try to delimit it any more than that. We're a little bit more literate in some tools than other ones, which means that sometimes we get a little bit lazy. Sometimes we tend to choose the same things over and over here, which is probably not a good idea. You need to really look at the problem and then picking the right tools. But yeah, something like the community site for Kankerkompensar, for instance, that's one thing that we do. A few other ones, for instance, simply trying to connect people who are handwerkere to people who want to have building projects inside of their homes, so to connect them based on skill and location. So it's a wide range of problems that we try to solve with a digital solution. That's sort of.
So this is the type of, say, language methodology that you use when you interact with your customers. Then.
That is the idea. That is the idea. I think on our side it's also still quite a work in progress, but the idea is to understand what the problem is and to actually not try to push technology, try to understand what is the problem from both a functional and a user point of view before we say, we build WordPress blogs. Because then you're pushing technology, and that's, in my mind, not such a good idea.
For me, I don't know if this is a trap that people fall into, but for me it seems the question, what's the functional requirements for this use case, is very logical. It's quite natural. And to connect the function to the technical requirements feels quite natural as well. But the other one is a little magical. What does technology have to do with the use case? And so I would say, like, my if I hadn't seen this clockwise direction in your 1, 2, 3 question, then I would have logically probably gone the other way around.
Yeah.
And is that a trap? Because I'm an amateur, I'm no developer, I don't know. It's just my
Neither am I, by the way.
Okay.
I draw pictures for a living. That's what I do. Yeah. It's a nice one. Chase, I could definitely see how it could be a good idea to also say, well, let's try to figure out the desired behavior. Then, now knowing what we know about the function, maybe we can pick a technology that will help us to build that functionality, and then you transform number two into just a check. Does this technology make sense given our different use cases? Because I think that sometimes you might, given I want to do A, B, and C, and I can definitely achieve it, but just from a functional point of view, we're not really caring about the diversity that use cases do introduce to your understanding of functionality. So just from a functional point of view, I can definitely achieve this with this technology. Then you could easily do your requirements, your technical specification from that point of view, and then just check. In my mind, I think maybe it's just a personal preference point of view. I think to me it makes sense to make sure that if we can learn anything about the user, since that is where our value will be delivered in the end, I would like to gain as much insight into making good decisions as early on in my project as what I possibly can. So I would rather, even if sometimes that is a little bit of a weird question to ask, and you would find, I think that if you actually use an example, you'll probably be a better example, a real life one, you'll probably find you get more answers for this than what you actually think. But I do think that sometimes this could feel a little bit, I don't know, almost like what could you possibly answer there, as you say, because what does the use case really relate to the technology?
Let's take an example. Let's say that I want to have a website of some kind.
Yeah.
And I have some functional requirements, so maybe I need to tag some things, and I need to have some different, I don't know, I want to do some things.
Mm-hmm.
And then everyone, then I would sort of do what technology would suit these functional requirements. That's logical for me. But the other way around, it's like, okay, so publishing houses tend to use Episerver or they use Drupal or whatever, and that's is there a suitable technology available for me?
Yeah.
It's like do what everyone else does, anecdotal evidence kind of thing. That's how it feels to me, because I can't see the connection outside of that.
Well, I would say there's a difference between consensus and use cases. The fact that the whole of the rest of the market might be using something that just tells you about how they are using it. It doesn't say that you should now use it. I would more say that the use case there would be that, is there's going to be something that's got a low amount of traffic, for instance. So then we probably don't need to pick something where performance is number one issue. If it's however going to be a new engine for Facebook, for instance, then definitely we need to pick something that allows us to have a high performance level. And the whole architecture then needs to have a high performance level. But again, you can reason the other way around as well. You could rather say, given that we need to build something like a social network, perhaps maybe something PHP based, maybe not. That could be. I'm not suggesting that this is the only possible way around, but I think that what I want to shine a light on is that I think it's good to use the use cases as a source of practical information about how your system will be used in the end as early as possible. Since you will also be asking those questions, I don't know if you'll necessarily, I would be surprised if you rule something out here just because it didn't make sense in your use case, that now you didn't get to, if you say I've got a certain tool set here and now I'll see how I'll use it, I would be surprised if you rule something out that you could have used. But maybe if you do rule it out, then it's super important that you did rule it out, because that means it didn't work for your use case. There's no point in saying, I can't build this. I mean, I can build many, many things in Lego. That doesn't make it a very good idea.
But I think that area, number 2 there,
Yeah.
is either really, really interesting to understand, or trivial.
Probably, yeah, exactly. Yes. Oh, I saw him first, sorry.
It could probably be that if you go counterclockwise around the circle, you actually implicitly do step 2 without realizing it.
It could be, because if you're now saying, I'm already picking a technology for my functions, you already are thinking about your functions in terms of your use cases in any case, because that was the first thing you did. Because so you might already have something in mind. And I think that happens to us a lot, where we try to understand the functionality from the use cases. It's obviously this, and then we might not even discuss it again. So maybe you're right. Yeah.
I think there's a risk that we lose connectivity to the actual user when we skip the step 2, because we gain distance when we go in that direction. I went to a talk here that suggested that we should use the same personas when we do UX design as when we do testing.
I attended that one too. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think this is a similar thought. And what you said about emotions, in my app development team that I once belonged to, we thought about the difference between web apps and apps that you download to your phone. And that is an emotional difference. Even though the data is still in the cloud, you feel
You're quite correct.
You feel more connected to a downloaded app, and it feels like it's yours and safer. And I think that emotional part of the technical requirements and the use case can only be captured in the
Absolutely,
second area.
Because the fact that you considered these had a huge impact on which technologies you actually chose.
Yeah.
And then you figure out how do I use this to build the required functionality. Yeah.
And it can also be that you forget that the user is sitting on the Pogatog and the connection is slow and everything breaks down and they start to cry just because when you've gone through the functional requirements.
Which Pogatog do you go? all of them.
Yeah, but that it should work without networking could be the impact if it doesn't can be lost if you
Good
use
example.
the second area.
Yeah, that's a good example. Nice.